Constance Barnes is in the Crown Court on a charge of abducting a child. She admits that on November the 7th, she took away from his home in Stockport a 9-month-old infant, Derek Bramley, and kept him for 2 days with her in her cottage in the village of Treadley near Fulchester. The defence claim that the baby's mother, Linda Bramley, gave permission for the accused to take the baby. The mother denies this. Police Constable Alan Clark of the information room of Stockport Central Police Station is in the witness box.
Yes, now what time did you receive this telephone call on the evening of November the 7th, Constable Clark?
Just on 9 o'clock, sir.
Will you tell us what was said in that conversation?
Well, it was a woman's voice.
Yes, you cannot say whether it was the accused's voice.
No, sir. She, the woman, said she wanted to report a baby having been taken from its home. I asked her if the baby was her own, and she said no. So I asked her if the parents knew that the baby had been taken. And then she got very agitated, started talking very quick. I couldn't make out a lot of what she was saying, but there was something about the baby having blood all over its face. She said a lot more, of course, but I could only make out a few words. I thought I heard her say slut. I tried to calm her down. I told her not to worry and that we'd take care of everything. And then I asked her where the baby was abducted from. She stopped talking then, very sudden. And then she said, I've written this down, sir.
Yes, well, please, read it to us.
She said, I didn't abduct him. You're mad. What do you mean? She said I could take him. And then she rang off. She was very incoherent, sir.
Thank you, Constable. Your Honour.
I can assure you, Constable, that the woman you spoke to on the telephone was, in fact, my client.
Yes, sir.
Constable, you've told us that you thought you heard Miss Barnes use the word slut, and at one point she said, you're mad?
Yes, sir. As I say, I couldn't make out a lot of what she was saying.
Oh, quite. And what was her manner when the conversation began?
She was more or less what you might call calm at the beginning, sir.
Business-like.
Businesslike.
You've told us that you had difficulty in understanding what she was saying. Why? Was she shouting? Screaming? Crying?
No, sir. It's just that she started talking so fast and so low, I couldn't rightly make out the words. It was a bit muddled up like.
Yes. At any rate, she made the call to report that the baby had been taken from his home.
Yes, sir.
She did not deny that she had the baby in her care.
No, sir.
And she informed you that the mother of the baby had given her permission to take the child away.
That's right, sir.
Yes. Thank you.
Constable Clark, in your work in the information office, you must receive many hundreds of these emergency telephone calls.
Yes, we do, sir.
Yes. Now, what was your overall impression of the accused during this call?
I thought she was one of the nutters. Unbalanced, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Constable. I have no further questions, Your Honour.
You may leave the witness box, Constable.
I call Miss Bronwyn Lloyd. And you're a social worker? And have you been employed by the Stockport Social Services for the past 3 years?
Yes, I'm a caseworker.
Yes. Now, Miss Lloyd, would you tell the court the events of Sunday afternoon, November the 9th?
Yes, I went with the police to Waterside Cottage in Treadley, Miss Barnes' cottage. They told me they believed the missing baby, Derek Bramley, was there, and they asked me to represent the care authorities.
Yes, and the child was, in fact, on the premises.
Yes, I took the baby and Miss Barnes was arrested.
What was the accused's demeanour when you saw her that afternoon?
She was very upset. She started crying when I took Derek out of his cot. She tried to take him away from me.
His cot?
Well, it was a Moses basket, really, a wicker basket on a stand.
Well, a somewhat unexpected piece of furniture to find in a maiden lady's cottage, wouldn't you say?
Oh, it was new. She told me she'd bought it in Fulchester the day before.
Yes, well, was there any other baby equipment in evidence?
Yes, there was a pair of weighing scales, a baby bath on a stand, and a mobile, birds on a string, hanging over the basket, all new.
Yes, I see. And was there any baby food?
Yes, there was some dried milk, some baby cereal, some tins of strained fruit and vegetables, a couple of feeding bottles, oh, and some rosehip syrup.
Yes, all that might be required for a prolonged residence of the infant. Now, you say the accused was crying and that she tried to take the baby from you.
Yes, the baby was crying too. He'd just woken up.
Yes, now you're perhaps aware that the accused claims that the baby suffered head injuries when he was abducted from his home.
Your Honour.
Mr. Ferguson, as you're perfectly aware, it is not in order for you to employ the term abducted. It is precisely to decide whether or not an abduction took place that we're here today. Quite apart from that, you must not feed your witness with information before asking a question, as you well know.
Yes, I beg your pardon, Your Honour. Now, when she took the baby, did you notice any signs of injury on Derek Bramley, Miss Lloyd?
No, I didn't.
The child was later examined by a doctor.
Yes, my lord, there is an agreed report. As you will see, the police doctor states in the first paragraph that there is no evidence at all of head injuries.
Yes, I see.
Now, Miss Lloyd, from what you observed that morning, would you say the accused had any kind of emotional attachment to Derek Bramley?
Oh, yes, very much so. When I was about to drive off with him in my car, she came running down the path with a little stuffed panda bear for me to give him. She was crying all the time she was talking to me. It was very sad. I felt sorry for her.
Yes, I'm sure, no doubt. But, of course, for 2 days, the mother of the baby had not known where he was or what was happening to him, had she? Now, you know the mother of the baby, don't you, Miss Lloyd?
Yes, I'd visited her 4 times at her home. She was on social security. The department was trying to do something about rehousing her.
Yes. Now, Miss Lloyd, in your opinion, was Linda Bramley an adequate mother, in your professional opinion?
Yes. The baby seemed well cared for. Linda always kept his shawls and blankets immaculately clean, which wasn't easy. There's no hot water laid on in that house. Derek was always asleep in his pram when I called, or in his cot. I never once heard him cry.
Yes. And you saw no evidence of her neglecting her baby, no reason why he should be taken from her and put into care?
No, I didn't.
Thank you, Miss Lloyd.
Miss Lloyd, when you and the police arrived at Waterside Cottage, did Miss Barnes give any impression of anxiety or guilt?
No, she was very quiet. When she opened the door, she just looked at us for a minute. Then she said, "Oh, he's upstairs." Then she took us up.
He was asleep when you picked him up and then started to cry?
Yes, and she tried to take him away from me.
Didn't she say to you, Miss Lloyd, you're not holding the baby properly?
Yes, she did.
You had any experience yourself of handling young babies, Miss Lloyd?
Well, no, I haven't really.
You've told us that when you visited Mrs. Bramley at her home on those 4 occasions, you never heard the baby cry.
No.
I wonder if you're aware that babies suffering from malnutrition are often listless, apathetic, and seldom cry, and that it is said a starving baby is a silent baby.
No, I didn't know that.
And also, according to the doctor's report, which has already been mentioned, Derek Bramley was just under 2/3 the usual weight for his age, 9 months. You never noticed this?
No, I don't have a medical training, you know.
Of course not. In that case, you wouldn't know that young babies heal very rapidly, would you? In response to a query made to the police doctor who made this medical report, he also states in this memo, it would not be possible to disprove that the infant had a lump on his forehead and cuts on the mouth, as claimed by the accused, as all trace of this could have disappeared entirely in the subsequent 3 days. You wouldn't be trained to recognize this possibility either, Miss Lloyd.
No.
Yes, Miss Lloyd, did you ever see Linda Bramley feed her baby?
No, as I said, he was almost always asleep.
Yes, and your professional concern was connected with rehousing Mrs. Bramley. Did you inspect the whole home?
Yes, of course.
Now, we've heard about the temporary arrangements made by Miss Barnes for the care and feeding of the child. What about the arrangement in Derek's own home? Was there adequate food supplies, suitable equipment, and so on?
Well, I didn't actually look through her kitchen cupboards. It wasn't part of my job. You can't help people very much, you know, if they think you're snooping. But I did notice that his pram was a new one. Quite a smart, expensive one.
Was his room clean?
No, not very. As a matter of fact, the whole place was usually quite cluttered and untidy. I'd just like to say, not opinions, facts. Linda was being treated by her doctor for depression. Anyone could see that she was quite low most of the time. Now, I've always found that depression makes it very difficult for people to cope with things like housework. Well, it's practically a symptom in my experience. Linda's husband went into prison for a burglary offence in June, and she was very lonely. And she's so young, she's only 19.
Yes, I'm sure all these things are perfectly true, Miss Lloyd. It is also regrettably true that there are a great many lonely young women in the country living in deplorable conditions who manage to look after their children perfectly well. Now, tell me, Miss Lloyd, did you ever speak to any of Mrs. Bramley's neighbours about her care of the child?
No, there was no need to. It seemed to me perfectly obvious that she loved Derek very much. I'm sure she did. Anyway, there's only one neighbour, and I think she goes out to work. Linda lives in one of 2 little terrace houses. The rest of them in that street have already been demolished. There's only factories and office blocks around there now.
Yes, this is the sort of situation which has cropped up all too frequently in our newspapers recently, hasn't it? Miss Lloyd, on the night of November the 7th, Miss Constance Barnes entered one of those terraced houses. She went in. She heard a baby crying. The door was open. The house was dark and quite empty, except for Derek Bramley, who was lying on the floor in a filthy room, his face covered with blood. He and his mother are part of your caseload, Miss Lloyd. And yet you say you had had no reason for making an inquiry which would have shown whether this sort of thing could have happened to a 9-month-old child.
So you're absolutely positive, Mrs. Bramley, that you did not at any time say to the accused, do what you like with the bloody baby?
No, I never said that.
Yes. Now, can you remember what was said between the two of you that evening?
Well, not word for word, I can't. I didn't have a tape recorder on me at the time. But I know I never said she could do what she wanted with my baby.
Yes. Now, when you came into the house, you found the accused in your kitchen, didn't you?
Yeah, she was holding my Derek and poking round in my cupboards. He was screaming. She said he was hurt, but I didn't see no marks on him. He was just frightened. He doesn't like strangers holding him.
Yes. And how long had you been out of the house, Mrs. Bramley?
10, 15 minutes, maybe.
Yes, it was definitely not more than 15 minutes at the most, hmm?
Yes, I'm sure. I just said so. Only went out to make a phone call.
I'm sorry, to whom?
My friend, Tracy Knight.
Oh, why were you ringing her?
It wasn't for a chat, if that's what you think. I was just going to ask her if she'd come and stay over the night at my place. Miss Lloyd, that's my social worker. She says I shouldn't be on my own when I'm feeling depressed.
Yes, I see. And did you get through to your friend?
No, it was engaged every time. I tried about 4 times, and then I gave up and went home.
Yes. Now, were you surprised to find the front door of your house open?
Well, not all that much. That door's all warped, and sometimes the lock doesn't catch right.
Yes.
But I was surprised when I heard somebody was in the house and Derek crying. I mean, God, I was scared.
Yes, no doubt. But, however, you went through to the kitchen, and as you say, you found the accused there. What did you say to her?
I said, what do you think you're doing with my baby? Give him to me. But she wouldn't. She started to shout at me.
Oh, what was she shouting, Mrs. Bramley?
Oh, all sorts of things. Mean, horrible things. Just went raving on. Wouldn't let me get a word in.
Yes. Yes, I see. No doubt you were very upset. But
Upset?
can you remember what...
How would you feel? My baby screaming its head off and her going for me, her face all twisted up funny. I really thought she was round the bend. It's like an awful dream.
Yes.
She
no
said I wasn't fit
doubt...
to be a mother. She said she could put me in jail if she wanted. She's the one that's got me put in jail. The dried up old bag. She's too old to have kids of her own, so she thinks she can come in my house.
Mrs. Bramley, you must confine yourself to facts. I will not permit you to abuse the defendant. Now, counsel has asked you to relate what was said on the night of November the 7th. Now, just tell us what was said.
I can't remember all she said.
Well, she said that you weren't fit to be a mother. Did she make any other accusations?
She talked to me like I was a criminal. She said I'd left Derek on his own for an hour, which is a lie. She said he was dirty and there were no clean clothes for him. Well, she didn't know where to look, did she? She said I was stupid. She said, you don't love your baby, do you? As if I had no feeling. She called me a slut and said I was disgusting. I mean, who does she think she is? God or something?
Yes. Now, what did you do?
Oh, I got out of the room. I just had to get away from him, from the wicked things she was saying. I thought I'd better get one of my tablets quick. My heart was beating so loud and I felt really dizzy.
Yes, I see. What tablets are those?
They're not drugs or anything. The doctor gives me for my nerves.
Yes, I see. So you went out of the kitchen and you went upstairs?
Yeah, I got my tablets out of my bedroom. And when I got back down again, she was gone. I ran out into the road, but there was nobody in sight.
What did you do then?
Oh, well, then I went and got my neighbours and they took me to the police station.
Yes. Now, Mrs. Bramley, had you ever seen the accused before that night?
Every day, near enough. She was always hanging over his pram. Every time she passed her house, she'd be leaning over him, making silly faces and talking baby talk. I'd leave him out and I found out.
Yes. And did she often pass the house?
She works in the office block next door. I know now. Took the fuzz long enough to find out, though.
Do you mean the police, Mrs. Bramley?
Yes, that's right.
Then say the police.
The police.
Now, had you ever spoken to the accused?
Yeah, I did once. Didn't see me, though. I was upstairs. I shouted out of the window, and when she looked up, I ducked.
Well,
she didn't know where it came from.
Yes, I see.
I shouted, lay off, miss, it's too young for you.
Yes.
It's funny, that, though.
Yes, but you hadn't actually met her before.
No, but she knew I was all right. You see, in her office, she'd be able to see right through my front window, so she'd be able to spy at me.
Yes, well, of course, we can only speculate as to what she could do or think, Mrs. Bramley.
Oh, yeah, you'd take her side, wouldn't you? She came into my house, she stole my
Mrs.
baby,
Bramley,
didn't she?
Mr. Ferguson is counsel for the Crown. He is not on anyone's side. He's most certainly not on the side of the defendant, since he's here to present the case against her. Now, just calm down.
Thank you, Your Honour. Now, I've only a few more questions, Mrs. Bramley. The police doctor who examined your baby has said that he was somewhat underweight. Now, could you...
He's a small baby, he always was. Ask him at the clinic. Ask the health visitor. She said not to worry about him being so little.
Yes. Well, you took him regularly to the clinic, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Yes. Now, one last question, Mrs. Bramley. You've no parents, I believe.
That's right. I'm a bastard.
Mrs. Bramley?
Oh, pardon. Illegitimate.
Now, please, Mrs. Bramley, I'm only attempting to point out to the jury that in your life you are virtually without the experience of the warmth and support of family life.
It's not
I mean,
my
you were brought
fault.
up in a state institution in Manchester, were you not?
It's not my fault, though, is it?
Well, no one is suggesting for one moment that it is, Mrs. Bramley. I mean, no one is blaming you for anything, I assure you.
Oh, well, you wouldn't know, would you? Me stuck up here. Everybody at me making out I'm stupid, not believing what I say. I'm not the one that's committed the crime.
No, indeed, Mrs. Bramley. You are not. Thank you. No further questions, Your Honour.
Mrs. Bramley, you love your baby very much, don't you?
Of course I do. Who says I don't?
Oh, I'm sure no one would say that, Mrs. Bramley, but it can't have been easy for you bringing Derek up on your own like that. And I understand the conditions of your house are very unsatisfactory, is that so?
It's horrible. It's all damp and dark. I hate it, really. You know, sometimes I think I'll go mad cooped up in there.
And, of course, small babies, however much one loves them, can be extremely irritating at times. Eh?
That's right.
And it must be especially hard for you, suffering, as you've told us, from your nerves.
You know, sometimes I feel so bad. Lo, you know, I can't even move. I just seem to sit there for hours.
And I suppose the baby crying like that makes you feel even worse when you feel so low.
I have to shut the door to his bedroom or put him out in his pram outside when I'm bad like that, so I won't hear him.
Would you say you felt bad most
No,
days?
Your Honour, surely this
Yes,
is not...
Mr. Ferguson, I must say I'm finding this line of questioning a little irrelevant.
Your Honour, I'm only trying to explore and understand Mrs. Bramley's feelings, which I submit are most germane to this case.
Well, yes, it's fairly clear what you're trying to do, Mr. Cross, but I suggest that we put feelings to one side for the present and get on with fact.
Of course, Your Honour. Mrs. Bramley, you say that you take Derek regularly to the clinic. When was the last time you took him?
I haven't been able to take him for a little while. He's had a cold.
Oh, how long has he had that?
A few weeks off and on. You think it's gone and then it comes back again. He's got a cough on his chest.
It's probably the cold weather.
Yeah, that's right.
But this summer, when it's been so very warm, I expect you've been able to take him then.
Oh, I took him in July, I know.
And I expect that was the last time you were able to take him?
Yeah, I think it was.
And this is December. Yes. Have you had a doctor to see to him about this cough?
No, but I give him some medicine at night. It helps him sleep.
So it's possible for you to go out, knowing he'll sleep,
I don't leave him on his own.
Not a criminal offence to leave a baby alone, you know, Mrs. Bramley.
Yeah, well, I might leave him on for a little while, you know.
Well, not criminal, not unless it happens persistently and leads to neglect and perhaps to the baby coming to some harm.
I've told you already there wasn't any blood on him or anything. He'd never fallen out of his cot before.
Oh, he'd fallen out of his cot that night, had he?
No, she just said that. She made it up.
Oh, I see. You know, Mrs. Bramley, Miss Barnes will also say that the baby was left out in his pram every day, even when it was raining or very cold, and sometimes, and very often, he was still outside after it had begun to get dark. Is that so?
Oh, she'd say anything to make me out to be a bad mother.
How many times a day do you feed your baby, Mrs. Bramley?
3, 4 times.
And at what hours?
Oh, I don't know, different. It depends. Sometimes he's not hungry. No good forcing him. He's on demand feed, see, when he wants.
Yes, except, of course, when you shut him up in his room or stick him out in his pram outside, as you've told us. What do you feed him on, Mrs. Bramley? Strained fruits, vegetables, cereals?
He's not onto solids. He didn't like them. When I mixed up the cereal, like they said, he just wouldn't. There wasn't any point.
No solid food at all at 9 months?
I've told you he didn't like them.
Well, it's not surprising the baby was underweight for his age, is it? Although, of course, you wouldn't have known that, as you hadn't had him weighed since July. Now, Mrs. Bramley, you've been married only 2 months, you say, when the baby was born. Is that right?
Yeah, so what?
Did you intend to get pregnant?
Not likely.
So Derek started off life as a mistake and gradually became a burden to you, isn't that true?
No, it isn't. I was glad when Derek was born. We both were. You said yourself it's hard for me bringing him up on my own, and it is. But that doesn't mean I don't love him.
Do you not feel guilty indeed about all the times you didn't love him, Mrs. Bramley? Now, you've told us that Miss Barnes began shouting at you when you entered the kitchen on the night of November the 7th.
Yes, you did.
It was you who was doing the shouting, wasn't it? My client will testify that you made a vicious, violent, and obscene verbal attack on her.
Yes, and everybody will believe her, won't they? It doesn't matter what I say. They walk over people like me. I'm nobody. He's my baby. She took my baby. She stole him. And it was her shouting at me. She said my husband was a jailbird. She said I was a bastard. She said Derek could never have a chance with her. It's like...
Mrs. Bramley, Miss Barnes could not have known that your husband is in jail or that you were illegitimate. It's your own voice you hear, isn't it, accusing you?
No.
It wasn't Derek who was screaming, it was you. Screaming violent and vicious abuse at my client until you became so hysterical you slammed out of the room shouting, do what you like with the bloody baby.
No, that's a lie. I never said that.
Mrs. Bramley, you'd been out of the house that night for an hour and a half, hadn't you?
I was only gone 15 minutes. I told you that already.
Miss Barnes entered your house at 7:15. You returned at 8:45. Shortly before 9 o'clock, Miss Barnes took the baby out of the house and drove to a public call box to telephone the police.
She says it was 7:15. She's the one that could be lying. She's the one frightened of going to prison, not me.
I repeat, Mrs. Bramley, we know as a matter of fact that her telephone call was at 9 o'clock. What we do not know is why you didn't arrive at the police station to report the alleged abduction until 10 minutes to 10. The police station is less than 10 minutes' walk from your house, Mrs. Bramley. How do you account for that?
The jury in this case is composed of members of the general public. The Queen against Barnes will be continued tomorrow in the Crown Court. It is the second day in the Crown Court of the trial of Constance Barnes, accused of abducting a 9-month-old baby, Derek Bramley. The defence claims that the baby's mother, Linda Bramley, who was in the witness box, gave Miss Barnes permission to take her baby.
Now, Mrs. Bramley, why didn't you tell us before that you didn't go at once to the police station?
It's all mixed up in my mind what happened that night. Besides, I was embarrassed.
Embarrassed, Mrs. Bramley?
To tell you what I mean, it sounds so daft, I really didn't want to say.
About what?
Well, it's the truth. You do crazy things when you're upset, don't you? Well, I ran down the street, like I said, and then I went home. I was walking round and round the house. I just didn't know what to do, and then I did some washing.
Washing?
Some of his things, Derek's, his clothes and nappies like. I told you it sounded daft. And I tidied up a bit. I just kept thinking, who's she calling a slut? I could hear her voice going on and on at me. I think it was a shock.
Yes, sir.
And then I realised it was like somebody cut me wide open, that he'd been kidnapped. So then I ran and got the McAllisters next door.
Mrs. Bramley, I want you to try very carefully to remember exactly what you did say to the defendant at the end of your conversation with him that night. You know, when you left the room. It's very important.
I never said anything, Your Honour. Not a word. I was just stood there, stock still, listening to all the horrible things she was saying. I never said anything.
I see.
Thank you. Mrs. Bramley, there's been a good deal made of your supposed lack of affection for your son.
And it's all lies, honestly. My mates will tell you that. I used to take him all over the petrol station, where I used to work before I was married. I was ever so proud of him. Wasn't I, Tracy? I was crazy about him.
Mrs.
Do you
Bramley, you
remember
must
that?
not address persons in the court. You are here to give evidence to the jury.
Sorry. No, it was only in the last few months since Jimmy went to prison that Derek got me down a bit sometimes. But we had some lovely times together, him and me. I used to take him on bus rides. He loved riding on buses, and I do too. And twice I sneaked him into the pictures with me. He was that quiet and good. Never loved anybody like I love him. But you do get fed up with babies. Everybody does sometimes. My doctor says so. Says it's only natural.
Thank you, Mrs. Bramley. No further questions, Your Honour. That is the case for the Crown.
You may leave the witness box, Mrs. Bramley.
I call Miss Constance Barnes. You are Constance Susan Barnes, and you live at Waterside Cottage, Treadley, near Fulchester?
Yes.
And you were employed as a secretary by the firm of solicitors Rowland and Mason of Lane Hill, Stockport.
Yes.
How long have you been in their employ, Miss Barnes?
9 years.
And you commute from Treadley?
Yes, by car.
Have you always worked in offices, Miss Barnes?
No, this was my first job. I used to do manuscript typing at home. I had an invalid sister. She and I used to live in the cottage together. She couldn't be left. She died in 1966.
I see. And now you live quite alone.
Yes.
Now, Miss Barnes, at what time did you leave your office on the night of November the 7th?
About sometime after 7, I had some work to finish.
It has been suggested that you saw Mrs. Bramley leave her house that evening.
No, I was doing some copy typing in another office across the corridor.
And from your office window, is it true that you would be able to see into Mrs. Bramley's front room, as she has said?
No. You can see the house from our window, but not right into it. I'd never seen her at all until that night.
But you had, of course, seen the baby.
Oh, yes. In his pram outside the house. He wasn't a very healthy little baby.
In what way?
He was too thin, I thought, and pale, and always very quiet. A baby that age should be very lively.
Have you had experience of young babies, Miss Barnes?
Well, I have a young cousin who has a baby about the same age. She lived in Liverpool, and I used to go and stay with her, and sometimes she'd bring the baby to stay with me.
Now, to return to the night of November the 7th, when you left your office and were passing Mrs. Bramley's house, what happened?
Well, I could hear him crying. It was a pitiful sound, and it hurt me to hear it. I stopped in the street, and the house was all dark, no light anywhere.
What did you do?
Well, at first I thought, it was none of my business, so I went on towards my car. Then I began to feel frightened. It was all so bleak and desolate, and the streets were deserted. Well, I thought something must have happened, an accident. Well, I simply had to do something, so I went back and knocked on the door.
Which you discovered to be open?
Yes. And after a minute or two, I went in. I felt dreadfully nervous and rather foolish, really. I shouted hello or something once or twice, and nobody answered, and I couldn't find a light switch anywhere. So I lit my cigarette lighter and I went up the stairs where the baby was crying.
And what did you find?
It was very dark in that little room. And it smelt awful, sort of sour and fetid. I found a light switch and then I saw him. It was awful, really. Dreadful sight.
Would you describe it, please, Miss Barnes?
Well, he was lying on the floor near his cot. And there was no other furniture in that room at all, only bits of rubbish and dirty clothes lying about.
And the baby?
He had blood all over his face and on his clothes and all down his front.
Did you think of going for help?
Oh, no, not at first. I took him with me down into the kitchen. You see, I was looking for something to clean him with. And finally, I took a sheet out of the pram and tore it in half, and I used one half to wash him with and the other half as a nappy, and then I took him with me to the house next door, but there was nobody there.
What time was that, approximately?
8 o'clock. I looked at my watch.
And what did you do then?
Well, I thought of going to find a telephone to call the police, but by then it was raining and it was very cold, so we came back and waited in the house.
How long did you have to wait?
About 45 minutes. The baby went to sleep in my lap. Then he woke up and started whimpering, and, well, I thought he might be hungry, so I was looking for something for him to eat when she came in.
Now, will you tell us, Miss Barnes, exactly what happened between then and your leaving the house?
Yes. Well, she burst into the kitchen and asked me what I thought I was doing there. She was very rude and aggressive. I asked her if she was the baby's mother, and when she said yes, I said she ought to be ashamed of herself for leaving him alone. But I never said any of those things she said I did. It was she sort of shouting unspeakable things at me.
What sort of things?
Well, I'd really find it very difficult to repeat them all. She called me a nosy old bitch and a mean, ugly cow and several other obscene things. Well, she had very, very little vocabulary, few four-letter words. I'd never heard language like it.
And you made no verbal attack on her yourself?
Well, nothing like she described. I'm afraid I did call her a foul-mouthed little slut. Well, I was so taken aback by her violence. And I said she didn't deserve to have a baby and that I could inform the authorities and they might take the baby away. But I didn't say what she said. And that was when she screamed at me, "You can do what you like with the baby, the bloody baby." And then she rushed out of the room.
You're absolutely certain those are the words she used, Miss Barnes?
Oh, yes, Your Honour. Absolutely certain.
And you genuinely believed her to mean that not only would she not object to you taking the baby away, but that she might be encouraging you to do so?
Yes, Your Honour. I thought she was expressing a desire for someone to take responsibility for her baby.
Yes, I see.
So you took the baby to your car and drove away?
Yes, to telephone the police.
Had the idea of taking the baby back to your cottage at Treadley entered your mind at all?
No, not until I hung up on the police.
Why did you do that, Miss Barnes?
I'm afraid I wasn't very rational at the time. I was absolutely appalled that anyone should think I'd abduct the baby. I mean, it hadn't occurred to me. It threw me totally off balance. And then I could hear him crying in the car. I couldn't bear the idea of taking him to the police station. So then I thought I'd take him home. And I remembered I had some of Peter's things there.
Peter's?
Yes, my cousin's baby, the one who used to come and stay.
Oh, I see. So then you drove to your home?
Yes, and I gave him some milk and changed him, and I put him to bed on the couch in my room with some cushions around him. He was very good. He went to sleep straight away.
You didn't think of telephoning the local police then?
I thought of everything. I sat for hours wondering what was best. And finally, at about 11:30, I called Father Lawson. I knew he'd tell me what to do. But his housekeeper said he was away until Sunday evening.
And the next day?
Well, the baby didn't wake till 8:30, and, well, I fed him and I bathed him, and then I took him in my car to Fulchester to buy him some things.
Yes, now, these things, Miss Barnes, the point has been made by the prosecution that the articles you bought that day, a bed, weighing scales, baby bath, etc., might seem unnecessary for a short stay. Did the idea of keeping him any longer occur to you? Did you have any plans for that?
No, it wasn't like that. I wasn't planning anything. I just kept remembering that horrid, smelly little room where I'd found him. I was absolutely determined to make everything as nice and comfortable for him as possible.
Yes. So far as you were concerned, you were acting purely in an emergency situation. But of course, as you've said, you definitely had no plans for keeping him. That, of course, as you know, would be irresponsible and unrealistic.
No, I don't know that. Why should I?
Do you mean by that, Miss Barnes, that you did have plans to keep the baby?
Oh, no. I knew no one would let me do that. The authorities. But I don't think it would have been unrealistic or irresponsible. The mother had been irresponsible, criminally irresponsible. And what's realistic about a baby is that more than anything else in the world, it needs care and love. And that baby had about as much chance.
I'm sure that your views on childcare are very worthy. But the issue concerning us in this court is to do with your having taken possession of this baby. You're on trial, Miss Barnes, not for your ideas, but for your alleged actions. Mr. Cross?
No, Your Honour, I have no further questions.
Miss Barnes, you worked as a secretary in a solicitor's office for the past 9 years.
Yes?
You must have picked up a good deal of knowledge of the law during those years.
A little, yes.
Yes, well, I'm sure you're familiar with the Offences Against the Persons Act of 1861 and with Section 56 of that Act.
Not offhand, no.
No, really, Miss Barnes? Well, Section 56 is subject to two conditions, which, if they exist, make the taking of a minor lawful. If permission has been granted, or if there is a real possibility of injury to that minor. Now, both these conditions, you've seen to it, have been supposedly fulfilled. You've told us that Derek Bramley was hurt from a fall from his cot, and you've told us that Mrs. Bramley said to you, do what you like with the bloody baby. Both inventions, Miss Barnes, pure inventions. But a vital part of your plan, were they not? Now, as his mother has told us, you stopped to talk to the baby every day, didn't you?
Yes, but I wasn't planning to take him away. That's an absolutely ludicrous accusation.
No? Is it, Miss Barnes? Why did you stop so late in your office on that Friday evening?
But I've told you because I had some work to finish.
Yes, but you wanted to get done because you were taking a week off, weren't you? Your holiday from the following Monday, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
Yes.
Well, I suppose you'd say all that was part of the plan.
Isn't it, Miss Barnes? I mean, Waterside Cottage is very isolated. I mean, there are no neighbours nearer than a field away, are there?
No.
Yes, and no one knew you had the baby except the mother, no one. And she didn't know who you were or where.
I telephoned the police.
Oh, yes, you telephoned the police and gave them no information at all. Now, I understand that in 1966 you applied for legal guardianship of a baby. Is that true?
Yes, but that was...
In 1966 your invalid sister died and you were alone with no one to care for. And that same year, Elizabeth Michaels, a 16-year-old girl living in Treadley, became pregnant. And did you not make plans to adopt her baby when it was born?
Betty worked for me. She was very miserable and unhappy when she knew that she was pregnant. I merely suggested that she could come and live with me and have the baby, and I'd be responsible for them financially.
However, this plan didn't succeed.
Oh, no. Her parents saw to that. They insisted upon a legal abortion. They didn't care for Betty or for her baby.
Yes, but at any rate you did, didn't you, Miss Barnes?
Well, I thought a baby's life mattered more than village gossip, yes?
Yes, obviously babies are very important to you, aren't they? I noticed that when you spoke of your young cousin and her baby, you said they used to come and stay with me. Do you still see them?
Well, no. She and her husband have emigrated to Canada.
Oh, well, you must miss the baby very much.
Well, of course I do. I miss the whole family. I'm very fond of them.
Yes. When was it they went to Canada?
Last June.
Last June. And it was in July that you began to make friends with little Derek Bramley.
Yes, about then. Oh, I suppose you're saying that I was laying my plans to spirit him away.
Well, you don't deny that you had become fond of Derek.
Of course I don't. Anybody would.
Well, he was quite an essential element in your life, wasn't he?
I think that's an overstatement.
Well, you were worried about him, weren't you? You said too pale, you thought, too thin, not a healthy baby, you thought.
She didn't look after him properly. She left him outside in his pram in all sorts of weathers, when it was raining sometimes, after it was dark. People like that shouldn't be allowed to have babies. Is that what you were going to say, Miss Barnes? She never paid proper attention to him. She never talked to him. She never played with him. She never took him out for walks.
Oh? Well, how do you know that, Miss Barnes?
Well, it's obvious from what she said.
Or are you so positive about this because what Linda Bramley guessed was true, that you spent a great deal of time looking out of that office window at that baby?
Well, I denied it because it wasn't
Now, Miss
true.
Barnes, you are on oath. You're saying that you never looked out of that office window into the little garden of the terrace house next door.
I'm saying I didn't spend hours gazing out of that window.
Surely, Your Honour, this matter has been covered sufficiently already.
Mr. Ferguson, I'm assuming that what you're attempting to do here is to establish the preoccupation of the defendant for this infant.
Exactly, Your Honour. In fact, I would go as far as to say an obsessive preoccupation.
Yes, I see the point.
Thank you, Your Honour. So, Miss Barnes, although you could not keep Derek Bramley under constant scrutiny, yet you were firmly convinced that he was being neglected.
And I was right, wasn't it? Absolutely right. Everything she said has proved that.
Yes, we're not discussing what has come out in this court, Miss Barnes, but what your state of mind was before you took the baby. Now, was Derek out in his pram, as usual, on November the 7th?
Yes. And as usual, she didn't bring him in until long after dark.
I see. So you did happen to be glancing out of the window at least once that evening?
But, yes.
Well, would it be more accurate to say that you returned regularly to that window during the course of the evening to see what was happening to the baby of which you had become so obsessed?
No.
You said that you happened to be glancing out when Linda Bramley took the baby into the house.
But, yes.
And isn't it true, Miss Barnes, that you were yet again glancing out of that window when Linda Bramley went out to make a telephone call?
Telephone call? Take an hour and a half? What do you want to get all dressed up for and put on makeup?
Oh, I see. So you were perjuring yourself earlier when you said that you hadn't seen her leave the house?
No, I wasn't. I noticed all that about her when she came back into the kitchen later on.
Now, Mrs. Bramley has testified she was out of the house for only 15 minutes.
Well, that just isn't true. I went into the house at 7:15 and she didn't come back until 8:45.
Oh, yes, so you tell us, Miss Barnes, but unfortunately we are again without witnesses as to your version of the event. I suggest that it was after 8:15 that you saw Mrs. Bramley leave the house.
I didn't see her leave. And I heard Derek crying at 7:15.
Oh, yes, you've painted a very touching picture for us, Miss Barnes. The compassionate angel of mercy, but not the true picture. A woman who longed desperately for a baby of her own and suddenly saw her chance one evening to steal another woman's child, a child to whom she had become obsessively attached.
I didn't steal him. She didn't care about him. She's lying. She's been
Now,
lying all along.
Miss Barnes, you maintain, though Mrs. Bramley categorically denies it, that she said to you, do what you like with the bloody baby.
Yes.
Now,
She
even
did say
supposing
that.
for a moment that she had said that, or something remotely like that, are you really asking us to believe that you would genuinely consider this permission to take her baby from her?
Yes, I did think that.
But you're saying that you believe that this young mother was actually requesting you, a total stranger, to go off where she couldn't know with her only child.
Yes.
However, you did take him off, didn't you? To your country cottage 20 miles away.
Yes, but I was going to see Father Lawson. I knew I wouldn't be able to keep Derek.
Miss Barnes, you are a practicing Catholic,
Yes, I am.
and you go to Mass every Sunday.
Yes?
And you're saying you really didn't know that your parish priest was going to be away that weekend, that he wasn't going to say Mass in your church on Sunday? I mean, surely he would have announced this to the congregation the previous week.
But I don't know. I didn't... I forgot.
Yes, I see. But of course, by telephoning Father Lawson that evening, you at least acquired one more useful witness who would indeed vouch that you had indeed tried to get in touch with him. Yes, very shrewd. Was that the idea?
I'm not like that. I can't understand how you make me sound absolutely inhuman.
Well, that is certainly something inhuman, Miss Barnes. or perhaps more accurately, inhumane, in taking a child from its mother. No further questions, Your Honor.
There seems to be something of a trend nowadays towards not interfering, as it were, with the lives of helpless babies and children. Would it be correct to say, Miss Barnes, that on the night of November the 7th, your overriding feelings were of compassion and concern?
Yes, yes, of course. If you could have seen him. I'll never forget it. And I don't suppose he will either. That kind of terror loneliness can lodge itself in a baby's life permanently.
No doubt you're right. You did not see Linda Bramley leave the house that night?
No.
You say she became very angry, hysterical, and viciously obscene in her language when she returned to the house an hour and a half after you had entered it to rescue her baby.
Oh, yes, she did. She seemed to hate me. And I felt she hated Derek, too.
And what she said in her rage and hatred seemed to you to be a repudiation of her child, a longing to be rid of him. You sincerely believed she wanted you to take that child away?
Yes, I did.
Now, Miss Barnes, did you know that the housekeeper, Mrs. Pratchett, would mention that telephone call to Father Lawson?
Oh, yes, yes. She knows we're very old friends and he often comes to see me.
And would do so just as soon as he returned to Treadley as possible?
Oh, yes, he did, in fact. Just after I'd left... after I'd gone down to the police station, he came there at once.
And in the interim, between Friday night and Sunday afternoon, did you make any preparations to leave Treadley?
No.
Would have been a simple enough matter, would it not, for you to put the baby into the car and to drive off with him anywhere?
Well, I suppose so. It hadn't entered my mind. You see, I didn't want to move him about anymore. What he needed was peace and quiet.
Of course. And we are also told that you evinced no surprise whatsoever when the police knocked on your door that Sunday afternoon.
Oh, no, I wasn't surprised.
In other words, Miss Barnes, you knew full well that when you took the baby away that evening, this was simply a temporary rescue operation. You perfectly properly telephoned the police to report the incident, but owing to your distress and anxiety for the child, you failed to complete the call. Later that evening, you attempted to contact your parish priest. At no point during those 3 days did you entertain any idea of keeping that baby. Is that correct?
Miss Barnes, please answer counsel's question. This is a very important point, as I'm sure you know.
Your Honour, I'm on oath. I don't perjure myself. I can't say that the idea never entered my mind. Of course there were moments when I couldn't help thinking. I was so happy with him. And he was so... He had more love from me in those days than he'd had for weeks. He needed me.
The jury in this case is composed of members of the general public. The Queen against Barnes will be concluded tomorrow in the Crown Court. Constance Barnes is charged with the abduction of a minor, 9-month-old Derek Bramley. The defence maintains that the baby's mother, 19-year-old Linda Bramley, had left the baby alone for more than an hour and that he'd fallen out of his cot and suffered face injuries. They claim that when she returned to her house to find Constance Barnes comforting the child, she became angry and told Miss Barnes she could take the baby away. All this Mrs. Bramley has denied. The accused, Constance Barnes, is in the witness box.
Miss Barnes, Miss Barnes, we can adjourn for a short time if you're too distressed to continue.
I'm all right. I should be all right. I'm so sorry.
I won't keep you any longer, Miss Barnes. It takes courage to admit that there had been fleeting moments during the days you had this baby in your care when you wished time would stand still, that he might stay with you. We all have daydreams and fantasies, Miss Barnes, but it is not a crime to daydream.
Thank you.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
You may leave the witness box, Miss Barnes.
I call the Reverend Edward James Lawson. You are Father Edward James Lawson, priest of the parish of Treadley and Bargate.
Yes.
Father Lawson, how long have you known Miss Constance Barnes?
12 years, ever since she first came to my parish.
Would you describe her as a friend as well as a parishioner?
Oh, yes, certainly. In fact, she was a friend first. She didn't become a member of my congregation until about a year after we met. And she came to me for instruction, and I received her into the church in 1964.
How would you describe her, Father Lawson? What sort of a woman is she?
Well, if the word hasn't gone out of fashion, I would describe her as a good person. She's a person of tremendous integrity, highly intelligent, and capable of quite selfless devotion. She looked after her invalid sister for many years before she died in 1966.
Yes, she told us that.
Yes, but what she probably didn't tell you was that for the last 3 years, her sister was in a coma, and Constance refused to put her into hospital.
Would you say that Miss Barnes is a stable, well-balanced person?
Well, I'm never quite sure what that means. It's very often said about rather stolid and unimaginative people, and Constance is neither of those. I think we're all a little precariously balanced. It's not a very stable, well-balanced world.
Yes, but what I mean is, Father Lawson, is she erratic and unreliable in her behaviour?
Oh, no, I would certainly not use the word erratic or unreliable.
What was your reaction when you heard she'd been charged with abduction?
Oh, total astonishment. I thought there must have been some terrible mistake. And may I say that I do feel the law treated her with unnecessary severity.
We are here to examine the incident itself and the events leading up to it.
Indeed, yes. I beg your pardon, Your Honour. But when I say I was astonished that she'd been arrested, at that stage I had no idea what she'd been arrested for. The idea of Constance breaking any law was quite inconceivable.
You've always found her a law-abiding person?
Oh, yes, almost excessively so, if that isn't disrespectful.
Would you call Miss Barnes a lonely person?
No, I don't think I would. There's a distinction, isn't there, between loneliness and aloneness. I would say she's a person who's used to being alone, who quite enjoys solitude. I've always found her a very tranquil person, and lonely people are seldom that.
It has been said of her in this court that she was hungry for a baby. Would you agree with that?
No, I truly would not.
Father Lawson, apart from your capacity as priest and confessor, does Miss Barnes confide in you also as a friend?
Oh, yes, as I do in her. We have long talks whenever we meet.
And you meet often?
Yes, I have supper in her cottage about once a week, and she comes to the rectory regularly to look after my paperwork.
There's also been some discussion during this trial of a time in 1966 when it was proposed that Miss Barnes take over the legal guardianship of a child who had not yet been born.
Yes.
Did she confide in you about that?
Yes, she did. Betty Michaels, a very sad and disastrous business, poor girl. I admired Constance for wanting to support Betty and the baby, but I was quite glad when it all came to nothing.
Oh, why do you say that, Father Lawson?
Well, Your Honour, her sister had just died, and Constance was in a bad emotional state. It seemed unwise to me to take on such a demanding new domestic commitment.
Yes, I see.
But since that time, Father Lawson, you have experienced her, as you say, as a tranquil person.
Yes, I have.
And from what you know of her, would you think her at all capable of planning and carrying out the deliberate abduction of a baby?
No, I absolutely would not. It is preposterous to think of Constance Barnes behaving like that.
Thank you, Father Lawson.
Thank you.
Now, Father Lawson, I expect you knew that the accused was attached to the baby of a young cousin of hers.
Sorry, but forgive me. Is it a point of law that you refer to her as the accused?
No, it's not a point of law, no.
Just it seems so impersonal and unpleasant. Yes, I did know that Constance was very fond of her cousin and the baby.
Yes. Did you know that this cousin and her family had emigrated to Canada this year?
Yes, she wrote me a letter about it.
Oh, a letter?
Yes, I was ill in London in June. I was in hospital with pneumonia. A lunatic complaint to contract in one of the hottest summers we've had in years. Still, you don't want to hear about my health.
Oh, no, please, please. How long were you in the hospital then?
About 11 weeks. There were some rather tedious complications. Then I was sent to convalesce, and I returned to work in mid-October.
Yes, I see. So you were away from Treadley, more or less continuously from June?
Yes.
It's just those months in which Miss Barnes first became involved with the young Derek Bramley.
I don't quite understand what you mean by involved.
Well, I mean when she began to be concerned and worried about his health. I think that might be called involvement. At any rate, you were at that time, she was at that time, deprived of your company and counsel, her only close friend.
Well, she came to see me quite a few times in hospital. But no, you're quite right. When one is ill, people think you can only cope with pleasant news. A mistake, I think. I think it's quite therapeutic to concentrate on other people's troubles.
Yes. But as you say, she did write to you about her cousin's departure to Canada. Was she very upset about this?
Oh, yes, it was a tremendous wrench. And she was very close to them.
Mr. Ferguson, I cannot but feel that we're spending unnecessary time on past history.
Well, Your Honour, it is material that in the weeks before the events of November the 7th, the accused was perhaps experiencing a pervading sense of personal deprivation, which might have led to an intensification of this need or hunger for a baby of her own.
Yes, I see. All right, go on.
Thank you, Your Honour. Now, Father Lawson...
Excuse me, you see, when you say a need for a baby, as a matter of fact, Constance, in effect, had one. Lucy was practically her child. You see, Lucy's parents were not at all well off, and Constance helped to support Lucy from her birth. In fact, Lucy spent all her holidays with Constance from when she was very small.
Oh, I see. So it would not be altogether fanciful to say that when her cousin left the country for Canada, that Miss Barnes lost both her baby and her baby's baby, which would be, as you describe, a terrible wrench for her.
Well, yes.
Yes. And is it so preposterous to surmise that because of it, Miss Barnes's daydreams of having a baby of her own to care for might not have spiraled into the impulsive action of actually taking one?
It simply isn't like her. It doesn't make any sense if you know her. And as for this unprovoked verbal attack, reducing the girl to hysterics, Constance isn't capable of that kind of destructive anger.
No. She's expressed quite potent anger in this courtroom against Linda Bramley, against the alleged neglect of her baby, and against the parents of the girl, Elizabeth Michaels.
Yes, but that simply isn't typical behaviour. It was all very unfortunate. Thank God I was there and able to prevent anything worse happening.
I'm sorry, Father Lawson, but you were there to what?
Yes, it was just that there was this very unpleasant scene, and I arrived in time to calm things down.
A scene? Well, between whom? Between Miss Barnes and the parents of Elizabeth Michaels?
Well, yes. She went round one night to try and persuade them against this abortion. You could call it a case of righteous anger on her part. And I don't know what your views on abortion are, but this girl was 4 months pregnant.
What happened, Father Lawson? You say she went there to the house at night?
Well, yes, it was all very foolish. I mean, she didn't stand any chance of influencing those two. Things got, well, a bit out of hand, and Mrs. Michaels, a very vindictive and disagreeable person, I'm sorry to say, phoned the police. But, as I say, fortunately, I got there first.
Yes, why did she telephone the police?
Well, Constance got very upset.
Oh? What did she do?
Well, she didn't do anything. She lost control. She shouted at them.
Oh, I see, uncontrolled. Angry, shouting.
Yes, but don't you see, she was in a state of personal despair. Her sister had just died. She was unhappy and distraught.
Yes, as she was when her cousin Lucy and her family left for Canada in June.
Oh, dear. I really don't think you understand. Your Honour, I know this is past history, but I do think it would help to clarify things.
What would clarify things, Father Lawson?
Well, to point out the unique part that Constance's sister played in her life. You see, they were evacuated from London in 1940, and they'd only been a month with their foster parents in the country when their real parents were killed in an air raid. Constance was then 14, and her sister was 10 years younger. So, in a way, Constance became her sister's mother. And then, 10 years later, Constance became engaged to be married, and unfortunately, her fiancé was killed in Korea. It was then that her sister contracted this, terrible wasting disease that no one seemed to know anything about. So then she took Waterside Cottage and devoted her entire life to her sister. So that, you see, When she died, it was for her a kind of spiritual catastrophe. In no way to be compared with her cousin going to Canada.
Oh, and how can you say that, Father Lawson? You weren't there when that happened.
But can't you see? It's a different thing, a totally different thing.
No, I don't think I do see that, and nor would I expect a priest to suggest that despair is something that can be measured.
What I'm trying to say is, it is not realistic to suggest that Constance was in a state of despair because of her cousin going to Canada. If she had been, I would have known about it, just because I am a priest. Despair is something I encounter very often in my work. She could not have hidden such strong feelings from me.
Now, Father Lawson, wouldn't you agree that to take a baby from its mother and keep it in secret for nearly 3 days could be called a desperate act?
Well, it would depend on the circumstances. And in this case, it was the baby that was in a desperate situation.
Yes. Now, Father Lawson, would you allow that your affection for Miss Barnes might not impede your objectivity?
Well, yes. Yes, I would have to allow that. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you. Of course, we have only Miss Barnes's word concerning this desperate situation.
Yes, but don't you see, I was the first person to get to Constance after she'd been arrested. She was in a state of great distress. She was in no condition to invent any story, especially to someone who knew her as well as I did. And she stuck to that story for the whole fortnight she was in prison. And that absolutely appalled me when the magistrate refused her bail. I mean, here was a woman of impeccable character. Oh, last. I'm sorry, Your Honour. Stupid. I was not to say that she was in jail.
And although this is something which, due to coverage in the national press, you may have read in your newspapers, you must put from your mind the information that the defendant, Constance Barnes, was first refused bail in the magistrate's court. She was granted bail on her second application 14 days later. But neither of these facts must influence you in considering the evidence you've heard and will hear in this court, or in reaching your verdict. The decision of the magistrates not to grant bail could have been based on all kinds of factors and could have been wrong. So it does not in any way reflect on either the guilt or the innocence of the defendant. Will you continue, Mr. Ferguson?
Father Lawson, 4 times in her life, Miss Barnes has taken on the role of surrogate mother, but she's never had a child of her own. 4 times. Now, do you not think this is significant?
Yes. I think it demonstrates a loving and protective nature.
Thank you, Father Lawson.
Thank you.
No further questions, Your Honour.
Father Lawson, you are Constance Barnes's closest friend and confidant.
Yes.
I must ask you if you have today experienced even the slightest misgivings about your evidence that it would be quite out of character for her to have done what she is alleged to have done.
None whatsoever. Not even the shadow of one. I know this to be true.
Thank you, Father Lawson.
Thank you.
You may leave the witness box, Father Lawson.
I call Mrs. Jean McAllister. And you live in the house next door to Linda Bramley, the mother of the baby in this case?
That is correct, yes.
In fact, you are her only neighbour, isn't that right?
That's right. There's only the 2 houses left in Lane Hill. All the rest have been pulled down to make room for offices and factories. The 2 houses are due for demolition too, thank goodness.
They're not very pleasant houses to live in, I gather.
They are not. It's all you can do to keep them clean. No hot water, outdoor sanitation. I've never lived in such a place. It was all my husband and I could find when we moved down here from Perthshire last year. The housing situation's very bad. Fortunately, we're moving to a very nice estate in February.
Yes. Now, I want to ask you a few questions about the night of November the 7th.
Yes.
I believe you were out in the earlier part of the evening.
Yes, I go out 3 nights a week to do a market research job.
And your husband, was he in?
No. He was out having a drink with a few friends. He got in about 10 o'clock. I was in by 9:15.
And when you did return, Mrs. McAllister, did you happen to see your neighbour, Mrs. Bramley, entering her house?
No, I didn't actually see her, but I heard her.
What did you hear?
Well, it was just a few minutes after I got in. I was in my kitchen making a cup of tea when I heard voices next door. The walls are like paper, you get no privacy at all.
Whose voices were they?
There were 2 of them. The loudest was hers, Mrs. Bramley's. I could tell the other voice was a woman's, but it was much softer.
Could you hear what was being said?
No, but I could tell it was some kind of a quarrel. Mrs. Bramley sounded very angry. I've heard her like that many's the time before with her poor wee baby.
Yes. On this occasion, how long did the voices, the quarrel, go on?
About 10 or 15 minutes, I should say.
Now, Mrs. McAllister, I want you to search your memory very carefully. Whose was the last voice you heard?
I don't have to think carefully about it. It was hers, Mrs. Bramley's.
Are you absolutely sure about that?
Positive.
And the words, what was said, could you make that out?
No, but I can tell you it was something short. Just a few words. More of a shout. She sounded hysterical to me.
And angry?
Very angry. And I can guess the kind of words they were.
Had Mrs. Bramley ever been angry with you?
She had, and with absolutely no provocation from me. I'd merely asked her to be good enough not to throw her rubbish onto my side of the pavement. Well, she told me to mind my own blankety-blank business, and other things I'd not care to mention.
But on the night of November the 7th, after her baby had gone, it was you she came to for help?
No, my husband. It was him took her to the police station. She used to come round, borrowing things and the rest of it. On the night she knew I was out doing my market research, she could get round my husband. I'm not saying I wasn't sorry for her, but she'd never have come to me for help. My husband's soft about young folk, even a girl like that. We have a son of our own, 18, but he's at Technical College in London, so we don't see very much of him. He's doing very well, but he's busy, of
yes,
course, with
Mrs.
exams
McAllister, when you say a girl like that...
Well, I mean to say, she wasn't a very nice class of girl. She's married to a common thief, of course. What can you expect? And she kept that house like a midden. And she was a bad mother.
How did you know that?
Well, like I said, she was always shouting at the poor wee soul when he cried. And you could tell she didn't feed him properly. Such a peaky wee baby.
Have you ever seen or spoken with the defendant, Miss Constance Barnes?
Yes, once. I was just away to do the shopping, and she was having a wee chat with the baby in his pram.
When was this meeting?
It was the end of October or the beginning of November, I think. I know we both said it was very cold and wet for the baby to be left outside.
So this was quite recently, before the night Miss Barnes found the baby alone in the house. During that conversation, did Miss Barnes strike you as being excessively agitated or concerned about the baby?
I've gone over this many times in my mind, of course, but no, I couldn't say she did. She just seemed very kind and sensible to me, very well spoken.
Thank you, Mrs. McAllister.
Mrs. McAllister, you seem to have very definite views about Linda Bramley.
I form my own opinion of her, yes.
Quite an adverse opinion, too, isn't it? But not based on very extensive knowledge. You went into her house only once, didn't you?
Yes.
Yes. Just after she and her husband moved in?
Yes, the day after. I went in to see if I could lend her a hand, as a neighbour should.
Yes, well, it's a little difficult to understand when you had the opportunity to amass all this data, as it were, on Mrs. Bramley's habits, temperament and personality. I mean, one visit to her house and one conversation with her hardly seems sufficient, does it? I mean, and yet you still say you are of the opinion that Linda Bramley was a bad mother.
Yes, I was. I'm sorry to have to say it, but it's true. In fact, it wouldn't have surprised me a bit if he'd turned into one of those battered babies you read about.
Had you ever thought of reporting Mrs. Bramley to the police, for instance, or the NSPCC?
No. She has a social worker coming to visit her. That sort of thing's their affair. It's what they're paid for.
Mrs. McAllister, I suggest that everything you've said about Linda Bramley is coloured by violent prejudice. Not a nice class of girl, you said. Married to a common thief. Not at all the kind of girl you'd wish to be associated with, is she? And your hostility towards her is based on resentment, even jealousy, is it not? I mean, you said that your husband was kind to her, that she could get round him.
Jealous? Of that? That?
Yes, exactly. That. Linda Bramley is hardly a person to you, is she? Now, all this combines to make the report of the quarrel that you overheard on the evening of November the 7th scarcely unbiased. I mean, since then and now, You've discovered that the other voice you heard belonged to that of the nice, well-spoken lady that you met once in the street. Whoever it was shouting that evening, it couldn't have been that better class of person, could it?
I've told you what I heard. I've told you the truth. And I'd like to
Yes,
say...
I no doubt that you think you've told the truth, Mrs. McAllister. What I'm saying is that your dislike and disapproval of Linda Bramley might well have influenced your evidence. No further questions.
Mrs. McAllister, is there any doubt in your mind that the person you heard shouting that light was, in fact, Linda Bramley?
No, it was her.
You have lived next door to her for a period of more than 8 months, and during that period, there have been many occasions when you have heard her shouting.
More times than I care to remember. And I'd like to say what I was trying to say to him. I'm not a snob. When I said she wasn't a nice class of girl, I didn't mean it the way he said I did. I judge people by the way they behave. I like to see a bit of decency and common courtesy and kindness, that's all. I've always thought it was a woman's duty to keep a clean house and take good care of her children. And whether I liked a person or not, I wouldn't tell lies about them. I'm a religious woman, I don't tell lies.
No, Mrs. McAllister, thank you. That is the case for the defence, Your Honour.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defendant in this case is charged with the abduction of a minor. Now, as you've heard, she cannot be said to be guilty of this crime if the parent of the minor gave her permission to take him away. Before you can bring in a verdict of guilty, you must be satisfied, and satisfied beyond all reasonable doubt, that Linda Bramley did not say what the defendant maintains, or that even if she did, she didn't mean it seriously, and that the accused realized that. If you find that the mother did consent to her taking the child away, or at least that the accused genuinely believed that the mother had given her consent to taking him away, you must find her not guilty. Now, the fact that the accused kept the child with her for 2 days thereafter is not relevant. She may have behaved thoughtlessly, selfishly in so doing, but that is not a crime in itself. Now, will you retire and consider your verdict?
All stand. Members of the jury, will your foreman please stand? And just answer this question, yes or no. Have you reached a verdict on which you're all agreed?
Yes.
And you find the defendant, Constance Barnes, guilty or not guilty on the charge of abducting a minor?
Guilty.
And is that the verdict of you all?
It is.
Constance Barnes, although found guilty, was given a conditional discharge. The jury in this case was composed of members of the general public. Next week, our cameras will return to bring you another leading case in the Crown Court.